Here we have a riparian woodland. What that means, basically, the riparian zone is the zone sort of perpendicular to a river or a stream or a loch, basically a body of water. Riparian woodlands have multiple different benefits, whether that be through acting as a buffer between agriculture and improving water quality, acting as a biodiversity habitat, a habitat corridor. One of the main reasons why we're targeting the riparian zones at the minute is for river cooling. There's a study being done currently by Marine Scotland, which showed that back in 2018, approximately 70% of Scotland's rivers reached a point of thermal stress. This means that the salmon inside them, or the fish inside, instead of going around their normal daily business, they would actually change their behaviours to look for cool water refuges. Riparian corridors are the best tool we have to shade these rivers and actually create cool refuges right along the water. And if we can do it in the headwaters up here, it makes a big difference to the main stem. Riparian corridors and riparian woodlands are normally broadleaf woodlands. So native species is what we use, things like birch, alders, willows. Depending on the ground conditions, you would change different species, so not all species would deal with wetter conditions. Typically we try and aim for at least 50 metres either side of the water, just to get a big enough buffer in between the farm and the river itself. However, we know this isn't possible everywhere because, say for example, the rivers tend to be on the valley floors, which is also where, say, a farm's best silage field is. So if a 50-metre buffer might impact their crop too much, that actually their business wouldn't be viable. So it's important to try and get that right balance, but as big a diversity of species as possible. We try and get shrubs in there as well, just to get a bit of sort of difference in habitat, as well as canopy height, which helps for shelter and shading for the livestock. There are also some restrictions to planting woodlands as well. So for example, here we're right on a public right of way, so it's important for us not to block that and to keep that open. There's also different site designations such as SSSIs, SACs. We also have wading birds. Wading birds are in big decline at the minute. It's important not to interfere with those habitats. Although it's important to get as many sort of shrubby species in there as possible, there's a new focus on carbon as well. Carbon can be a great tool both to make projects happen, to get that funding in place, or if the farm wants to make up the shortfall themselves, it can be a good asset for the farm. Peatlands is another thing we've got to be really careful for, especially in Scotland. So it's important to recognise that and keep that. It's not really a case of just sort of putting any tree anywhere, you've got to put the right tree in the right place. There's multiple different benefits to a farm of riparian woodlands and woodlands in general, whether that be sort of shelter and shading. We've had a lot of farmers say that they've actually had a reduction in lamb loss over winter because there's been that sort of shelter there for them, to hide from the conditions. Again, you can see it's really sunny here now. A lot of the sheep are underneath the trees, getting that sort of a bit of a respite from the sun, which can keep their condition and actually improve their live weight gain. So it's a beneficial for the business that way. Looking forward, there's likely to be an emphasis on natural capital, and riparian woodlands are a massive asset to a farm in terms of the biodiversity, but also just into the value of the land itself. So as well as all the biodiversity benefits, there's also natural flood management benefits as well. So trees can actually reduce peak flows in flood periods, both by intercepting the water, infiltrating the water into the soil, and taking it up and evapotranspiration it back out into the atmosphere. So they're an essential part of the water cycle. If our peatlands and woodlands are in place and the hills in the right places, it can actually allow the rivers to have a steady flow all throughout the year.